And welcome to The Pulse here on Fox 2, Metro Detroit's only local nightly political talk show. We have a lot to talk about. Over the weekend, we had some big news that affects thousands of people here in Metro Detroit, more than any other place in America. We're talking about the overthrow of Syria's government. What does this really mean? Could it lower the temperature of the raging conflicts in the Middle East? President Biden has his ideas of what this means, and so does President-elect Trump. We'll dive in. Also, transnational groups breaking into homes in Oakland County. You've heard about this for months. We're hearing from the sheriff of Oakland County about what's being done about it and what stricter border policy could do to help clamp down on this issue. First, though, it's been more than 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, and President-elect Donald Trump is calling for immediate ceasefire, saying in an interview he'd be open to reducing military aid sent to Ukraine. He also said he would consider possibly pulling the U.S. out of NATO.
If they're paying their bills, and if I think they're doing they're treating us fairly, the answer is absolutely. I'd stay with NATO.
But if not, you would consider the possibility of
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Trump has reportedly spoken to Putin since winning the election in November, but the Kremlin in Russia, they deny it, calling it fake news. Meantime, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's open to the potential deployment of Western troops into Ukraine to guarantee the country's security as part of an effort to end this war. So just a brief background on the NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was established back in 1949 by the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations to in part provide collective security against the Soviet Union. And nowadays, they focus political and security issues, and they promote democratic values and diplomacy. There are currently 32 nations in NATO. And while leaving NATO wouldn't happen overnight, since it needs congressional approval, the idea is definitely getting a lot of talk at the national level. So we wanted to know what people locally here in Metro Detroit think. Is that a good idea? Here's tonight's Pulse Check.
Tough one. I personally believe they should stay in NATO.
I think they should stay and come up with another option if possible.
I say stay in NATO since I'm a veteran.
Any reason why?
Yes, because I think that I don't believe in isolationism. I think NATO is a protector against World War III, or helpful in war.
I don't trust, especially where our country's going, which I'm okay with. I just don't trust NATO. I don't think NATO's going to stay the way it is right now, just to let you know, especially what's going on with Ukraine. I don't think they're going to stay that way.
Catching me on the spot. I haven't thought about to give you an answer.
Okay, fair enough.
It is a situation going on. Like, I think I predicted this a long time ago, actually, when I was a kid. I see it, it's kind of funny. I see it, if the Lions ever win the Super Bowl or go to the Super Bowl, you know the world's about to end. And, like, the Lions are winning right now. And look at all the mess that's going on. And I really can't even answer that question because it is a dice roll. Either way is harmful. You got to pick the less evil. So, should the United States stay in NATO? I guess I'm going to have to say yes.
All right, we also asked the question on our website, fox2detroit.com. An overwhelming majority of you think the U.S. should not leave NATO. This is not a scientific poll, just your thoughts. If you'd like to weigh in on our poll, just use that QR code there on your screen or head to our website to put in your vote. Well, University of Michigan Board of Regents member and attorney Jordan Acker was once again the target of pro-Palestinian protesters. Take a look at these photos that he shared online from outside of a window of his home that was smashed and a vehicle in his driveway that was spray painted as well. Acker, who is Jewish, says the noise actually woke his family up that morning. This is the third time they've dealt with something like this. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. have skyrocketed 360% since the attack on Israel. Well, back to that stunning development in Syria over the weekend after rebel insurgents seized the capital city of Damascus, leading to the downfall of the dictator Bashar Al Assad. Now the Biden administration is rushing to keep terrorists from taking over in his spot. You know, Syrian rebels stormed the presidential palace after 14 years of civil war that's been happening there, ending the 50-year rule of the Assad family. Assad fled to Moscow, by the way, as the rebels closed in after Russia and Iran helped prop up his regime for years. Now, the main rebel group that toppled Assad is led by a former senior al-Qaeda member who's now promising a representative government.
we're prepared to work with anyone in Syria who wants a stable, inclusive, democratic future for that country. That's what we intend to drive towards.
Syrians have started flooding homes through the borders of neighboring countries. 12 million people have been displaced. That is half of the country's pre-war population. You know, President-elect Trump could reverse course on Syria, posting on Truth Social, quote, "This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved." Of course, a lot to unpack here on a developing situation. Tomorrow, we're going to be hearing from people who are actually in Metro Detroit who have relatives in Syria. But tonight, we're joined by Professor Peter Trombor, professor and chair of the Political Science Department at Oakland University. And it's good to see you always. Thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me back.
So this, you know, you go to sleep on a Friday night and you wake up and maybe you didn't watch the news over the weekend. You wake up and you say, what's going on here? This is a group known as HTS. It's a terror group, according to the United States.
Right.
This is the most powerful rebel group in Syria, and they essentially overthrew Assad. What else do we need to know about this?
So the group itself is really interesting. Its origins are as an al-Qaeda affiliate. The leader of the organization, al-Jilani, decided to break away and sort of set up his own shop. And over the last several years, they have been drifting, and under his leadership have been drifting away from a very sort of strict Islamist, jihadist kind of perspective. And at this point, they're promising that Syria, under their control, or the control of them and the other rebel groups that are working with them, will be more representative, will sort of respect the rights of other religious minorities, and things like that. So that is a big piece of the picture. We don't really know what the future is going to hold on the ground in Syria, but the Assad dictatorship was remarkably brutal by any standard. And so just the fact that the Assads are gone and out of the picture promises to be a brighter day for Syrians.
You know, here at home, we saw in Dearborn and other places in Metro Detroit, you know, thousands of people hit the streets in celebration. And we have some of those pictures, and we'll show them to you here. When you look at video of that, and you know that all politics is local, especially here in Metro Detroit, what does this mean for the Syrian Americans who have relatives back home?
Well, I think it means a lot. We have to understand, though, that there was some support for the Assad government among Syrian Americans here in Metro Detroit. That wasn't the majority position, but the reality was that for a lot of the religious minority groups, Christians, the Alawites, the Druze, Syria's Jewish population, the Assad regime was seen as a protector. And so for that reason, there was some support for the regime despite its brutality. But even within Syria, the support even by Assad's own Alawite community, the group that he and his family came out of, that had begun to vanish. So I think what it means for people here is that they now have the chance, if they want to reconnect with their family and their heritage, to potentially go home for the first time in a dozen years. And so it's a really sort of, I think, a potentially bright moment for everyone. I
think one of the people who I saw on social media said, I'm no longer a refugee. I'm now someone who is Syrian, and I can go back and maybe help build back the country. But let's talk about there's hope, and then there's some people who say there's despair, because we've seen removing one dictator, for instance, in Iraq or Libya, that didn't lead to more peace. It actually led to more chaos. Is that a fear here?
A lot is going to depend upon what happens and unfolds over the next several weeks and months. If the institutions of the Syrian state, which were functioning, if those are kept in place, if we simply have a change in administration, but the bureaucracy stays in place, if they keep the lights on and the water flowing and the trash picked up and the medical services running, then the country's going to have a chance. It's going to have to shed itself of its real sort of deep Assad loyalists. But assuming they can do that, and they can do that in a way that's peaceful, then I think the country's going to have a chance to rebuild. But if these different factions begin to turn on each other and to fight for power and fight for control, then we could just see more chaos.
You know, Russia for years has put literally a stake in the ground in Syria with a naval base and other military operations there to assert power to us, to the United States. What does this do to Russia? Does this weaken them?
I think it's both an indication of Russian weakness and is going to additionally add to Russia's weakness. Syria was really important for Russia for all the reasons you mentioned. intervening there allowed Russia to say, look, we are a meaningful global player. We are a country that can be a bulwark and a balance against the influence of the United States in the region. And that was really important for them. They were building up this sort of profile as being a regional player who could sort of act as intermediaries and sort of diplomatic partners in addition to propping up the Assad regime. And now that's all gone.
So Iran, let's talk about what happens to them, because if you know, this all has a trickle effect,
That's
right? So Iran loses Syria. This was a place that they could funnel weapons through. They could do all kinds of stuff through. Does this weaken Iran significantly?
Absolutely. So, but again, it's also an indication of Iranian weakness. So Iran has suffered considerably from its conflict with Israel and Israel's real sort of near destruction of Hezbollah. So losing Syria for Iran means there's no longer a land bridge between Iran and Lebanon that would allow it to continue to prop up proxies like Hezbollah. Iran provided most of the foot soldiers that were on the ground, the foreign foot soldiers that were on the ground supporting the Assad regime. And this is primarily in the form of Iranian-supported militant and militia groups from obviously Hezbollah, which had about 10 to 12,000 fighters on the ground, but from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan. And with Iran out of the picture now, there is no longer that foreign fighter presence that's going to be continuing to sort of wage that civil war. And without them, the Assad regime's own security services and military were simply not willing to continue the fight.
For our good people who are watching, who are just trying to put food on the table and hang out and keep track of the lions in the world right now, it's so overwhelming. Bottom line, does this move make the world safer? Do you think we'll have the wars that we're seeing raging in the Middle East, the conflicts, get worse, get better? What do you think?
So the big danger anytime a country like this collapses is that it becomes essentially a lawless haven for terrorist organizations that they can use that as a jumping off point to wage attacks elsewhere in the world. And so one of the things that happened over the weakness as the rebels were taking over Damascus is the United States launched a significant series of airstrikes against ISIS targets inside Syria. And so I think our focus right now, and the Biden administration's focus, is making sure that Syria does not become the next terrorist haven the way that Afghanistan and other failed states have become.
Professor Trumbo, good to see you. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. Look, it's hard to unpack something with this kind of history in just a few minutes, but you always do a great job, at least kind of unwrapping the first layer. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. Well, you've heard the saying, all politics is local. In this town, that can be more true. The conflict in Syria, as you just saw, has local ties, and now ties to another big national story, the border. Transnational gangs targeting high-end homes in Metro Detroit. We're sitting down with the one and only Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard to talk about the crimes and his thoughts on how the new president may change the battle against this when we come back. And welcome back to The Pulse, Metro Detroit's only nightly political talk show. We're glad you make this your home for the information you need. This next topic is one that we've seen in our area. Transnational gangs hitting high-end homes in Oakland County, grabbing things like cash, jewelry, designer goods, and electronics. Joining us more to talk about this is the Sheriff of Oakland County, Mike Bouchard. Good to see you, Sheriff. You know, you've been talking about this for a while, but I noticed in the last few times that you've addressed this, your frustration level at this has kind of gone hotter and hotter. This is really frustrating, and one indication is how quickly you arrest one group and the next group comes in. Talk about the issue and the problem.
Yeah, it's been going on for a while now, and doesn't show a sign of abating. In fact, it's been increasing. You know, when I first started talking about it, it was about a year ago. We were getting hammered in December of 2023, and at one point we were getting hit so bad in Oakland County that we thought about $1 million a week was being taken out of Oakland County homes.
$1 million worth of stuff a week.
Yeah, wow. And so that's pretty scary on lots of levels. We talked to our intelligence, our counterparts across the country. We figured there was 100 Chilean teams of 4 to 6 operating across the country. They kind of cycle in and cycle out. That has done nothing but increase. We've been getting hammered in the last 2 or 3 weeks again here in Oakland County. We've had about 9 or 10 recent ones in the past 9 days or so. But the other thing that has begun to happen, if you remember when I first started talking about it, we had not seen, I talked to all of, again, the folks around the country, country, very involved in a lot of the intelligence groups, and as you know, Major County Sheriffs of America. We had only been seeing the Chilean teams, and we talked about with great concern the Colombians and the Venezuelans. At that point, we didn't have those. Now we have both.
So now we have a trifecta. You got the Chilean gangs, the Colombian gangs, the Venezuelan gangs, and just handling, for instance, the Chilean gangs, you arrest a group and 100 more teams come in. Boom. That's just one of the groups. Now that Trump is getting into office, and look, on this show, we talk about it during the campaign. The campaign's over. This is going to be our president. He has a plan where he says he's going to arrest the criminals first. How confident are you that we're going to see a change so that we can stop this rash of burglaries?
Well, you know, I believe, and so does our position in Major County Sheriffs of America, we need to fix our immigration system. We need to have something that's timely, that does vetting of people that are coming here for a better life, to have that process, people that are coming as temporary workers, all of that. We can do that with a little smart work. But we also have to have secure borders to prevent people that are coming here to do us harm from getting in. And without that, you can't have homeland security without border security. We know we have terrorist cells that have come across the border. We know human trafficking and fentanyl across the border has spiked through the roof. And we know that we've got these transnational gangs that have been hammering all over the country. So we need to secure the borders. Fix the immigration system, yes. For people coming for a better life, big proponent of immigration. You and I both come from families that did that. But we have to have a process that works, that's safe, that's vetting. We don't have that. And I'm hopeful the new administration will take some action on some of the suggestions I and we have given the current administration on how to get there.
In this current administration, even as Kamala Harris ran, she talked about the border being a crisis. Joe Biden has said they've talked about it, but there's been a lot of talk. But this administration, if we're just being frank, hasn't done as much as it could. In fact, it took away dozens and dozens of measures that Trump had in place to try to stave this problem off. With Trump coming in right now, is it going to be complicated to try to do this operation from a law enforcement point of view? How do you get these guys and gals out of these houses?
Well, some of it's commonsensical. I mean, lots of times, you know, people come into custody under an arrest for a different crime. We're not talking the status of how they're in the country, whether they're, you know, in the country illegally or not. We're talking they've committed another crime and come into our custody. Those are just easy. Those are low-hanging fruit.
Well, the criminals from different countries who are criminals when they came in, and they're criminals when they're here, and they're doing more
100%.
crime.
Yeah, so focus on that first, because those are the ones that actually are committing a lot of crimes. And a very small number of people in society in general get a very large number of the crimes. So focus your resources on those first and initially, and I think you're going to have a big impact.
Do you have these gangs pinned down in terms of who these people are? Are they coming in with families, or are they coming in individually?
Well, most of these gang members are coming in individually. They may be muling or working to try to get in with the unaccompanied minors and using them as a cover across the southern border, but no, they're operating without kids, and they're not with kids of their own. And so there's a couple paths that an administration in Washington can have some very exerted pressure on. For example, we know the Chileans are extremely well trained. There's probably a training camp somewhere in Chile. We need to have some pressure exerted to shut that down and to stop the pipeline of these new trained teams that are coming in and hammering us. We need to stop the VWP, the Visa Waiver Program, that 100% of the Chilean teams that we've arrested and charged in Oakland County have come through.
Two more questions. We only have about 40 seconds left. I've heard some people say, hey, if you try to do this, you're going to take away resources from law enforcement that can help people keep safe in any county in America. Is that true? Can you do this and also do your regular job?
Yeah, again, we're focused on people committing crimes, not on people that are here simply because they're illegally in the country. And if we get help on that, that actually reduces our workload. If we can get some help to shut down the VWP and to shut off some of these training camps and to stop the criminals that are coming in with the intent, or the terrorists with the intent to do harm, that actually frees our resources up rather than encumbers them.
Well, this is an important conversation, and one that, again, in a few minutes we begin to scratch the surface. I hope you'll come back when Trump gets into office. We can talk about how it's going and how that actually works. Good to see you, Sheriff Mike Bouchard.
Good to see you.
Always great to see you as well. We're continuing the conversation when it comes to border issues after the break. What the president-elect says he plans to do about birthright citizenship. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Welcome back to The Pulse, where we focus on all things people, power, and politics. And of course, none of those things stop just because it's a weekend. But if you did unplug, here are some of the things you may have missed happening in the world of politics. You know, during his campaign, Donald Trump pledged the largest deportation in American history, a plan he talked about during a Meet the Press interview on Sunday, with a focus on ending birthright citizenships. That's something that's actually enshrined in the 14th Amendment. It grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States, even to those whose parents are in the country illegally. Changing it would require ratification from 3/4 of the states. Trump is pledging to eliminate it via executive action, something many constitutional scholars say he doesn't have the power to do. Take a listen.
Somebody sets a foot, just a foot, 1 foot, you don't need two, on our land. Congratulations, you are now a citizen of the United States of America. Yes, we're going to end that. I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
The Trump transition team will have to figure out just how far his executive actions would go, with the expectation that they will all be challenged in court. In the meantime, on the topic of dreamers, those are illegal immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children, the president-elect struck a softer tone. He kind of alluded to that just now, leaving the door open for a compromise with Democrats, saying many of those people who grew up here have gone on to become successful citizens with jobs, and some of them even business owners. Well, moving things closer to home now, Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced last week he was planning to run for Michigan governor, and he's doing it as an independent, something that's causing a stir in the Democratic Party. That's because had Duggan stayed with the Dems, he basically would have likely been going up against Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson for the party's nomination for governor. Her name is being floated. Benson told political reporter Tim Skubic in a recent interview that she's considering running and thinks this all comes at a time when Democrats need to recover from losing the White House along with the U.S. House and Senate in last month's election. In her interview with Skubic, Benson, without naming Duggan, compared him to a firefighter.
To be firefighters, putting out fires, not running away from things we see as maybe, you know, on fire.
But isn't it, if you run away from a fire sometimes, you live?
But when you go into a fire with the hose and put out the fire and build back better, you can not just live and survive, but help other people live and survive as well.
Mr. Duggan has said he left the Democratic Party because it simply wasn't representing the citizens, and he rejects all the inter-party bickering. A Gallup poll does show that support for third parties has grown in recent years. Mike Duggan was actually on The Pulse here just a few days ago. You can catch more of our discussion with him on our website, fox2detroit.com. Well, the results are in, and Merriam-Webster has announced its 2024 Word of the Year, and it's a pretty timely one. Polarization. The word dates back to the 1800s and at the time was used to describe light waves. Of course, now it's defined as division into surely distinct opposites, especially when talking about opinions, beliefs, and interests of a group. It's a term we heard a lot in 2024, given it was an election year. Some of Webster's other top words resonate, and democracy also fitting. Well, that is The Pulse for tonight. Remember, if you'd like to connect and give me some feedback, good or bad, if you maybe have a question you want answered, you can scan that QR code right there on your screen to send me a message. My email is also right down there at roof.raj@fox.com. I'd love to hear from you. We'll see you back here tomorrow night. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse.